Checking the microphone.
Good evening. Oh, maybe. We on? Good evening, everybody. There I am. Hello. Thank you for being here. To our 8th forum. Is that correct? I've lost count now, but we're at number 8. We really appreciate you all being here. My name is Rachel Crocker. If you haven't been to one of these yet and heard my spiel, and if you have, I apologize for the fact that you are hearing it again for the 8th time. I'm the director of the Albany County Public Library, and we really do love doing these. We love working with the League of Women Voters. It's a lot of work, but it's absolutely worth it. And we feel like it perfectly fits our mission. So if you haven't heard our new mission statement, I'm going to read it one more time for you. And is this: the mission of the Albany County Public Library is to build meaningful connections, inspire growth, cultivate curiosity, and enhance community. And we think we get to do all of those things tonight. So thank you to the League of Women Voters. Like I said, it takes a lot to put all of these moving pieces together, and they put in a tremendous amount of work to make all of these forums available for our community. They also put in a tremendous amount of work encouraging people in our community to be informed and to vote. And I get little flutters of joy every time I see their table tents and coasters floating around Laramie, and hope that that helps to turn out even more voters into this really important election. Thank you all that are joining us here in the room. Thank you for abiding by the funny camera in the middle. That camera allows us to stream this live and to make it available to folks later on who couldn't make it here tonight. So thank you to those folks as well that will be watching online right now or at a later date. We appreciate all of you choosing to be informed, choosing to learn and hear from these candidates, and taking that time. And then, of course, finally, thank you, candidates. You guys spend a tremendous amount of time and energy to run and then to serve our community, and we owe you a debt of gratitude for serving us in this way. So thank you for being here tonight, but thank you for the way as well that you are serving our community. So for now, I will turn it over to Lynn to tell us a little bit how our forum is going to run.
All right, well, I'm going to start with our coasters tonight. We're so proud of these things. And I've got one for each of you. If you want to take one, just pass it on down. And the QR code that's on there is for the national website, where we have your information stored, and where each one of these candidates had a code, and they logged on and answered questions. We didn't have to type in all of that. And this QR code, we're in a new time now. It's trackable. We can tell how many people go to that site. Anyway, enjoy your coasters. We gave these out a couple of weeks ago at the Canterbury House, and there was a young man from Chicago and sort of challenged us. Well, I live in Chicago. I'm going to vote in Chicago. He said, well, go to 411 and look up Chicago. Oh. He got all excited. Well, so with those little stories, thanks also from this side to the library. Thanks to the county for funding them well. Keep that going. It's great equipment. I've said before, go and see the videos. They're, I compared them last time to the legislative videos, but don't take it personally. I appreciate the legislative videos, but they could use these guys to make a nicer, clearer video. We have one more forum after tonight, and it's next Wednesday, and it's the county assessor. That's the only competitive race where there's a new candidate that wasn't with us for the primary. The county treasurer, the clerk of court, the county attorney, and since we had to cancel the hospital board, fire district, and the rivers conservation, one of the members could attend that, and he'll attend with us on next Wednesday. All right, any questions? Let me introduce our timekeepers. First of all, we have Jamie Egolf, who's holding a sign. And as you know, It starts at 90 seconds and works its way down, 60, 30, 10, and then stop. Last night, I didn't have to remind anybody, but do look at the audience. Don't look so much at me. Apparently, there was one night everybody was staring at me. Reminded me of being in class. Anyway, and right next to him is the guy I forgot a week ago. This is my partner, Al Tremblay. He's the second timekeeper. And at some point, they'll switch. And we'll have a new, fresh timekeeper. All right, questions. Well, I will tell you, after all the publications and all the different legislative sessions we've had, trying to get fresh questions and new questions that we haven't used before is a tough haul. But I've got that, and I'm depending on the audience to supply a few more, but I think I've got enough old ones or slightly revised old ones. What I mean by old ones? I mean they were used in a league forum, maybe ours. We've stolen a couple from other leagues. They came from our membership. They've come from other audiences. What I mean to say, it's been a community effort, and we'll give precedence tonight to questions from the community, and here are two already. All right. Let's not forget them. Do we have any elected officials or people who were running besides these people in front of you? No? All right. Well, we would welcome them if they were here. So, I think that's it. Oh, I forgot her bio. Make up something. All right. Well, for those who were lucky enough to have Carrie as their moderator during the primaries, you know that she's wonderful. She kept everybody smiling, and they kept saying, well, why doesn't she do them all? Yeah. All right, so she has two small children who spend a lot of time at the library. She's well known here. And Carrie moved to Wyoming 6 or 7 years ago, 5 years ago. And she is a professional, not necessarily moderator, but mediator, arbitrator. Okay. You help people decide brands and things like that? Yes. And if you looked at her website, you'd see she's done this locally and nationally and with very big groups. All right. Well, that's great? All right. Well, then I will leave you alone up here and take my coffee.
This is one of the favorite jobs that I get to do. This is a volunteer gig, but I do it because I love it. So thank you to the panel, the candidates for coming. Thank you to the audience members for coming. My biggest fear for these forums is that I'll be caught without enough questions and have to make things up on the fly, which I can do, but it is much better when you all submit the questions. So thanks in advance for that. We are looking forward to a really thoughtful and productive conversation tonight. So I just encourage you to, our brains work in really concrete black and white, good and bad ways, and the reality of the problems we face is they are much more nuanced than that. So I invite you to embrace that nuance, and audience members as well. If you give me a super loaded question that's like, pick X topic. Don't you think that was stupid? I'm probably not going to read it in those words. I'm probably going to reframe it so we can get the most thoughtful question from our candidates tonight. So apologies in advance. I know the time is short, and thank you for our timekeepers for that. Apologies in advance if we have to interrupt you or if you just don't get to finish your thought. The meet and greet time afterwards will be time that you can follow up with folks if that happens to you. Same thing for audience members. I won't be able to get to to all of the questions. So if there's something you wanted asked that doesn't come out, it's not personal. Just make sure you ask the candidates in the meet and greet time afterwards. All right. With that, candidates, we're going to go ahead and have you introduce yourselves. We don't do big formal opening statements here. Just tell us who you are, what your party affiliation is, and what office you are running for. We're going to start down on the end with Chris. You can kick us off.
Good evening, I'm Chris Rothfuss. I'm the Democratic candidate for Senate District 9.
Great. Go ahead, Diana.
And I'm Diana Seebeck, Republican candidate for Senate District 9.
Our candidates are all microphone buddies with somebody. Thank you. You're doing a great job passing those back and forth. It really helps people on Zoom and in the room. So thank you for modeling that. Go ahead.
Merav Ben David. I'm the Democratic nominee for House District 46, and I would like to point out that my opponent chose not to participate tonight.
Thank you, Merav. Ken.
Yes. My name is Ken Chesick. I am the Democratic nominee for House District 13.
Thank you, Ken. Go ahead, Wayne.
My name is Wayne Pinch, and I'm running for a House seat, and I'm in District 13.
Thank you. Wayne's got the best radio voice so far. That's not anything about political skill, but you've got the best radio voice. I'm voting for that part.
I feel like I have to perform now. My name is Carly Provenza, and I am running for House District 45 as the Democratic candidate. And I would like to point out that my opponent didn't file to run for office. I'm running unopposed.
Thank you very much. All right, let's jump in then. We will start. I'm going to start on Chris's end, and we'll just rotate through. So Chris will have the first chance to answer this question. Each candidate, since you're all running for state legislative office, you'll all answer the same questions, but we'll rotate who starts. Okay, so you get to be on the hot seat with the least time to think once every so often, and we'll just keep going in that order. So Chris, let's start us off with, let us know what's a specific piece of legislation that you would want to sponsor or bring to the floor, and that you would most like to convince the legislature to adopt. So what's a specific piece of legislation that you see our state needs? Go ahead.
Well, Medicaid expansion is a piece of legislation that I've run for many years now. I'd say I'm up to probably 8 years of running some form of Medicaid expansion. And in terms of a challenging piece of legislation that I would love to be able to convince the legislature in both chambers to pass, that would be it. I think it would have the most significant effect on the people of Wyoming, where we have more than 20,000 citizens of the state of Wyoming that have no access to affordable health care at this point in time because of the loophole in the ACA that provides that if you're below 100% of the federal poverty level, you're supposed to be covered by Medicaid. Without that, there are no subsidies, there are no alternatives, and there's effectively no access other than showing up to the emergency room and counting on effectively the requirement that that care is provided, and then the tab for that ends up being distributed and picked up as a loss by the hospital. So we have an opportunity, and we've had that opportunity for many years, to provide that access to affordable health care for these vulnerable citizens. It would help our hospitals, it would help reduce the cost of health insurance, which is currently the source of a lot of the expenditures, and it would bring hundreds of millions of dollars to the state of Wyoming to strengthen our healthcare economy. So it's good for the people, it's good for the economy, and it's good for Wyoming. Thank you.
Diana, next to you.
Well, since I will be a newbie in the legislature, I don't have a specific bill. However, there are some areas that I'm really interested in seeing advance. And one of those would be a bill to encourage, require transparency in negotiating, hospitals negotiating with drug companies, hospitals negotiating with insurance companies for rates. I think that's an important thing that can bring our costs down. And another area is mental health issues and substance abuse. Very, very concerned about the effects of those challenges on our population, and I believe that there are ways that we need to address those things more vehemently. They're very important.
Thank you, Diana. Merav, go ahead.
First of all, I'm going to support Chris's bill, but because I do believe Medicaid expansion is very important, especially for maternal health care. But I'm interested in reducing costs for Wyoming residents. And the bill I would propose first, and hopefully convince my colleagues to vote for, is one that will leverage federal and state funds to create a program, a granting program for all property owners to install rooftop solar on their property. That bill will lead to major savings in expenses, both to homeowners, ranchers, as well as renters. A lot of our renters pay the electricity bill, and in addition to other very high costs they experience in the housing crisis, if we can make them independent in generating electricity, that will be a huge savings. So that will be definitely one thing that I will be pursuing as a newbie in the House.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ken.
Of course, Chris and Marav have stolen the thunder on Medicaid, but Chris, if you need a House co-sponsor, I'd be happy to be the House co-sponsor on the Medicaid bill. Many of you know that for the last 6 years, I've been an activist in trying to get dark money out of politics. I was one of the founders of an organization called Wyoming Promise, and we've been working for 6 years to get the legislature of Wyoming to sign on a resolution seeking a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. We've had a number of states have done that already, and we want to get Wyoming on the list of states that have called for that. We've had it introduced several times, and we've made some progress on it. And so therefore, I was going to make that my first bill that I would support, except on Friday, apparently now I don't need to be the first one to do that because the Corporations Committee of the legislature on Friday at a meeting agreed to sponsor it as a committee bill. So we no longer have to have an individual sponsor. If I were in office, I would be very happy to be leading the debate on the floor to support the bill that would hopefully put Wyoming on the list of states that say we need to get dark money out of politics and return to more sensible campaign finance. So I would not be the sponsor of the bill, but I would be an advocate and hope to vote for it on the floor. Thank you.
Great. Go ahead, Wayne. If it's
Well,
easier
Ken,
to
if you're at home instead of in the legislature, I'll help out with that because I'm a huge advocate of reversing Citizens United. It is probably one of the biggest things wrong with our country right now. If I had to do one thing and one thing only, I've got to turn to one of my sons who answered the call after 9/11 and joined the Marines. He ended up kicking open doors in Fallujah and did a little bit of work in Afghanistan. He came home with quite a hellacious case of PTSD. Makes it extremely difficult on your children. It makes it difficult on your spouse. Depending on who you speak to that is a veteran, the VA is pretty feckless. They're not a whole lot of good, especially when it comes to PTSD. So it's proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that microdosing with psychedelic mushrooms is absolutely the very, very best thing to help those folks rewire their brains and have a normal life. We're not talking about Woodstock, we're talking about microdosing. You don't even know you're on them, but the molecules have a way of getting into your brain and rewiring them. They gave their life, they gave their time. We need to set these ridiculous standards aside, give these kids what they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. And Carly.
Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of great ideas that I would fully support. And Wayne, I really want to say that I would also co-sponsor that bill with you. Quite frankly, we have an issue in Wyoming in terms of our justice system. When we talk about what's the role of government, and I have this question, what is the biggest thing that we can do for the most number of people? And we have a lot of people sitting in our incarceral system because they used substances. They didn't harm anybody else. They didn't bother anybody. In fact, they may have been using those substances to self-medicate. We have a mental health crisis, we have a substance abuse crisis, and we're treating those things with the criminal justice system. We need to think in a bigger picture here. What are the solutions for some of these issues, if they even are problems? And so I think in working on that going into the session would be, how can we reform our justice system so it's not just a jobs program through the war on drugs, but an actual effective system that gives people the tools that they need to be the best versions of themselves.
Thank you, Carly. Diana, you get to start us off for the next question. This is an education-related one. Several school districts are suing the legislature over education funding. Do you think that this is appropriate, and how would you advocate for change if elected?
Well, I don't think it's appropriate. The WEA is suing the state. And it will be found whether there's cause to sue or not. The state tries very hard to fund K-12 education and has done the best job it can. I do believe that there's lots to be done in our current situation of having our mineral revenue extremely decreased. We have challenges, and we have a lot of sectors to serve, including K-12. So I think that it's just really an important thing to have the legislature have a balanced view about being able to fund all of these various things, and we need to do the best we can. Teachers need support, and I'm a big supporter of teachers in K-12.
Thank you. Merav, next to you. Sorry, candidates, I'll tell you, if you ever need me to repeat the question, I'm happy to, especially since it's a large panel, so I'm always happy to repeat the questions. And if it's easier to take the microphones out, feel free to, if that's easier to pass them that way, whatever's easiest. All right, go ahead, Merav.
Yeah, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. Now I got to find which one it was. Several school districts are suing the legislature over education funding. Do you think it's appropriate, and what changes would you recommend for education funding that way?
So education and funding education is part of the Wyoming Constitution. We are obligated to give our children the best education we can, including at the college level. And so I think that the first thing we need to do is make sure that our schools are well funded, our teachers are well compensated, and that they have the supplies they need. Really, it seems ridiculous that teachers go online and try to get funding for pencils and crayons and stuff like that for the kids. So I think that the legislature needs to take that into account, and I think the recent budget cuts that we had, especially to the university, are not helping us at all. I think if we compromise our education, we won't be producing the workforce that we need for the future. And the other issue is that we also need to diversify our economy. Because what happens is that we are investing in our children, and then we offer them nothing in terms of jobs. So these two should go hand in hand, and we really need to get creative.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ken.
So you're asking a lawyer if a lawsuit's a good idea.
Offer all the disclaimers you need. No, da, 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 da.
And I have to say, yes, I think it sometimes it comes to that where you have to do it. I know that the Wyoming Education Association has tried its best to go through the normal process of lobbying the legislature, trying to get money. There have been, the share of money going to education has been shrinking over the years. There was a time in the not too distant past where the K through 12 system in Wyoming was a jewel for the nation. It was small class sizes, well funded, but we're going backwards. We've been backsliding for quite a while now as funding sources for that particular purpose have gone down. I do think we need to change the funding model in a way that's sustainable, so we're not trying to prejudge how much money the K through 12 system gets by saying you get this stream of revenue and others get other streams of revenue. I think that's just nonsense. We need to change that so that the legislature can make the necessary changes. But a lawsuit, yes, I do trust the court system to do the right thing. The courts will respect the right of the legislature to do what it has to do, but when the legislature does not comply with the Constitution, it's up to the courts to solve that problem. So I do support the lawsuit.
Thank you. Go ahead, Wayne.
There's a great deal of consternation about the transparency of the budget of the state of Wyoming. I have had my mind blown on many occasions over the last 6 months. That's not the answer to this question, but it would go a long ways to solving the problem if we knew where the money was coming from and where the money was going. Absolutely, the school board should have a right to sue if they don't think they're getting a fair shake. That's what the judicial system is for. I think it's just that simple, transparency, and let the courts decide.
Thank you, Wayne. Carly, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the lawsuit is completely acceptable, and I am quite frankly glad that it is happening at this point. We have had multiple consultants come to the legislature, and we have spent lots and lots of money on those consultants to come and say, are we adequately funding education? Have we done our job and our constitutional obligation to the people of Wyoming by providing them a good education? And they've said, no, we haven't done that, that we need to fund them more, that we need to make sure that we are paying teachers more, that our classroom sizes stay a certain way. There's a prescription for this, and we keep kicking the can, pretending like we can't take care of it, because we have a budget deficit and we're concerned that we're not going to have money, but we're going to go into this session with probably $2 billion or more in our savings account. And we treat our savings accounts in Wyoming, this big complicated budget, like they are a retirement fund. Like we're going to go retire off in Montana someday and we're not going to be here anymore. And that's not how we should run our state budget. When times are tough, we should take the money from our rainy day account and we should pay for education. And in short, and a bigger picture would be we need to fix how we raise revenue to begin with. But yes, the school districts should be suing the legislature.
Thank you, Carly. Chris.
So I want to start off by noting that we are very blessed in Wyoming. We have an incredible public education system. I don't think people fully appreciate how good it actually is. When you look around the country and you compare us to other states, we outperform. We have incredible teachers, we have incredible schools, and we're very fortunate. The challenge is that depends on funding, and it depends on an adequacy of funding that has been determined through a legislative funding model, and that then is based on a consultant's funding model. And in recent years, we have fallen short. So we know how much is needed, and we know how much is provided. And right now, it's $70 million short of a $1.5 billion budget. It's not rocket science to determine whether or not we're constitutional. We're not right now. That's the reason for the lawsuit. So it's a good choice. And if the legislature steps up in this next budget session and provides $70 million of additional funding, we'll be constitutional again, and the lawsuit will go away. As far as what else we should do, we need to look to early childhood education. We need to look to mental health in schools. And honestly, we need to look to putting fun back in schools. We test too much. We do too much of the kinds of things that really don't inspire students to succeed. We inspire them to sort of not want to be in school. So let's get back to having a good time, but let's make sure we keep our schools excellent.
Thank you, Chris. All right, starting with Marav on this next one. That question was obviously tied to the budget. And we've got several questions here that I think are all connected to the budget. It might end up being a Frankenstein question. Apologies in advance. I'm trying to get 3 questions in one. So we have some awareness of the declining revenue from fossil fuels, limited diversification for the economy in the state, and also some calls to reduce our dependence on federal funding. It sounds like currently our state budget for 23-24 has $2 billion in federal funding, and some folks in the state would like to see that go down, which would have an impact then on the rest of the balance. So given all that, we have the income side, we have the expense side. What would you advocate for? And again, it could be on both the income or the spending side, but what changes would you advocate for in our state budget so we're adequately funding the services that are important, but living in a sustainable way given some declining revenues? Sorry, Frankenstein question. How would you fix the budget, Marav?
How would I? Okay. So we have several problems with how we raise money in Wyoming, and Carly alluded to that earlier, that we have been dependent on one source of revenue to fund most of our expenses. That is a bad model. Even if you're a private citizen, you can't rely on one source of revenue and have in your portfolio just one investment. So we need to think about diversifying the economy that will immediately change how we get revenue into the state. And also we need to look at our tax system. We are not using all the models, all the revenue streams that are possible because we have been addicted to the fossil fuel industry. And there are excellent ideas out there. There are excellent economists that work at the University of Wyoming. And there are a lot of different proposals that we should follow and we should adopt. And again, as we do that, we need to make sure that we are not hurting Wyoming residents further than they are already. Right now, at least local governments are funded by property tax and sale tax, and that puts a burden on low-income families. So we need to think broader.
Thank you, Marav. Ken, same question to you.
Kind of, excuse me, kind of following up on some of the themes that Marav was just mentioning, we are kind of trust fund kids. We are living off of the revenue of the extractive industries, and we've never had to pay our own way. It's been paid for us by the businesses, and we're used to that. And it's easy to get soft when that happens. So we need to really think about how much government do we need and how much can we afford, and look at more creative ways of raising money. I do think that the market is moving against the extractive industry, especially coal, and that's not the fault of any government. It's not the fault of Joe Biden or any Democrat or any government leader at all. It's the market. Market wants clean energy. But we can take advantage of that. And instead of relying on extraction fees, let's rely on some manufacturing, some income. Let's have a manufacturing base here that can generate economic activity that we can then tax. For example, can we figure out a way to process coal into building materials and do that work here? We can still extract the coal, but instead of burning it and putting that carbon into the air, let's use those carbon molecules to build stuff. Graphene or carbon fiber or coal bricks. There's all kinds of projects going on, research going on. Let's make that into an industry, manufacturing things that can build materials using our own natural resources.
Thank you. Go ahead, Wayne.
Well, first of all, no income tax ever. We don't need it. The fossil fuel industry is going through a lot of turmoil. I'm pretty excited, though, about the nuclear plant that's coming in. We have a chance to lead the nation in nuclear. Sometimes you hear that word and you get a little nervous about glowing, but rest assured, the new one that's coming in seems like they've really hammered out a lot of the problems. Other revenue sources I've entertained, because I've had this question a million times. I think there's a way to extract money out of people who just rent here for very short time periods and then leave. A tenant tax, for lack of better words. I think we might look at some tolls. I think we might take a little more advantage of our natural resources and parks and monuments and things that people come here from all over the world to visit. There's opportunities there. No one's going to cancel a trip to Yellowstone because it cost extra $100. And I'm very much against taking a lot of money from the government because there's always strings attached. I think we live in a wonderful state with clean water and air, and it's worth a lot of money to everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Carly.
Thank you. Yeah, so we need to change how we do our revenue stream, and we've been beating this drum for a long, long, long time. I think really the best way to do that is to look at a big box tax, meaning how do we have large corporations who use a lot of money and services but don't pay back, pay their fair share. And that's really all we need to do in the state of Wyoming is ask folks like that to pay their fair share, and we'll probably more than take care of our budget issues. And it would certainly be a lot more steady stream of revenue that we can count on than this boom and bust cycle where right now oil's doing very well. Our fossil fuel industry is making a ton of money. That's why we're gonna have more than $2 billion in our savings account. That's great right now, but later it's gonna hurt. And as far as federal money goes, you know, we've had this conversation a lot at the legislature. Well, I had one colleague who said we should remove our shackles and reject all federal dollars. Rejecting federal money means things like cutting hospitals out of communities, the roads that you drive on, the school that you use. A ton of public services are tied to federal dollars. And so when we say we're going to be free by cutting these ties to federal money, the reality is that you can't be free to pursue the life that you want and the health care that you want and need and deserve if it doesn't exist because we aren't funding it. And right now the federal government pays the tab.
Thank you, Carly. Chris.
So a lot of the discussion I think is very poignant about needing to diversify both the revenue and the economy so that we can keep the budget strong. But I just want to expound upon that from the standpoint of it would be nice if this were an easy problem. It would be nice if talking points were sufficient. But there's a reason we haven't solved this problem over the past decade and longer. It's because these are really hard votes. And it's hard to come up with solutions, and it's hard to cast the votes to get to those solutions. The only reason we're in good shape right now is because in the 1970s, the mid-1970s, the legislature, both chambers, had the courage, the political courage, to pass a severance tax. That was wildly unpopular. You can imagine the visceral response from the state's energy economy at that point in time when the legislature had the audacity to pass the tax that now we all depend on. It's responsible, the mineral sector, mineral extractive, so coal, oil, and gas largely, for about 70% of our total revenue. And that has to change, but it's going to take the type of political courage that we saw in the 1970s to change that. So when you hear, let's not pass this tax, let's not pass that tax, let's ban those ideas, those are great talking points. But at the end of the day, how do we make the math work? We need real solutions.
Thank you, Chris. Go ahead, Diana.
It's an enormous question. It's hard to know where to begin. And everyone has made some good points. I believe our budget needs to be carefully looked at for revisions to make sure it's as clean as possible, that there are no hiding places in the budget, that it's transparent. Income streams, we need to be realistic about the fact that our state is rich in fossil fuels. I think we will be dependent on, the world will be dependent on fossil fuels to some degree for a long, long time. Fossil fuels have given us the standard of living that we have. We should appreciate them. They should be taxed. They are taxed. Other industry needs to be taxed. It needs to be fair. Income, I don't believe a personal income tax is necessary in Wyoming. There's just, like Chris said, it's a very complicated problem, and I think that solutions are complicated as well. But we need to foster small business. We need to encourage our entrepreneurs. We need to train our students to look for value-added products for the industry that we have, our cattle, our minerals.
Thank you, Diana. And Marav, you started that one, right? Yeah, I'm just double checking. I have my system, but I'll be perfect one day. I'm not quite there yet, so thanks for double checking. All right, Ken, you're going to start us off for this one. This is a library-focused question. State legislators outside of Albany County have discussed introducing legislation to limit the books available in schools or public libraries, including changes to obscenity laws. How would you respond to that type of legislation?
I am not in favor of banning books, period. I think the library does a great job of curating books and putting them in appropriate places. It's up to parents to make sure that the children are in those appropriate places. I absolutely, I'm absolutely opposed to any kind of book burning or book banning or censorship. Especially when I see some of the kinds of books that are being challenged. Anything that deals with critical race theory, they think is evil and sinful. No, critical race theory is actually something that we should all learn and understand how implicit bias. We all become better people when we learn those kinds of things. So the books that are being banned or proposed to be banned are actually things that we should all be reading and all be knowing about. In age-appropriate ways, of course. And I do trust the teachers to be age-appropriate in the classrooms. I'm certain that they are doing that, and I trust the teachers. I trust the librarians, and I am in favor of more knowledge. I don't want people to be, I want people to be educated, not to be indoctrinated. When you start banning books and say, you may not read these things, that's an attempt to indoctrinate somebody. It's not an attempt to educate anybody. And I'm in favor of education, not indoctrination.
Thank you, Ken. Wayne, go ahead.
This is a real simple question. First Amendment all the way, period. Parents and teachers, librarians do a great job. Keep the decision-making with those folks and stay out of the business of telling us what we can read and what we cannot do and extend that into social media. That's where it's going anyway. So First Amendment all the way.
I always try and ask questions where opponents will have different ideas, and then you'll surprise me when your ideas are like, yeah, I agree. Let's co-sponsor that thing. Whoever gets thank you. Go ahead, Carly.
Well, then we should just ban all books. I'm just kidding. I do not support that. When I was in 5th grade, my mom had me read a book, and she went to my 5th grade teacher and said, I want my daughter to read this book and do a book report on it, and would you work with me? And he did, and that book was previously a banned book. It was called Go Ask Alice. And that book has a lot of adult themes in it. And I don't really know why my mom wanted me to read that book other than she wanted me to have a different perspective. And I read that book, and it had a lot of adult themes in it: drugs, sex, homelessness, and rock and roll. But it was, what she wanted was me to have a different perspective, to think something else that my peers maybe weren't going to experience. And I think that's the point of education, the ability to take something that maybe you disagree with, or maybe that is really different than the views that you have, and think critically about it. And she sat with me and talked to me about that book. And my mom, to be clear, is a Trump voting conservative. And that was her philosophy in educating me. And I am very grateful for that. I'm also very grateful for Article 7, Section 11 of the Wyoming Constitution, which says that the legislature and the superintendent of public instruction shall not have power to prescribe textbooks. We also have a state statute, 6-4-302, which says that schools and colleges, universities are exempt from this obscenity clause. So leave it to the schools. First Amendment.
Thank you, Carly. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, it's going to sound like a little bit of a broken record. Go First Amendment. And I don't think institutions, countries, or societies that have banned books have a particularly good, strong track record that we want to follow. The First Amendment is very clear about free speech, but it's the foundation for free ideas, it's the foundation for critical thinking, it's the foundation for a lot of that which we hold dear, and the idea that we would erode that by trying to prescribe what people can read, that's unacceptable. I would always oppose.
Thank you, Chris. Diana.
Well, I would like for you to repeat the question because I think that the answers are really not referring to exactly the question.
Sure. State legislators, outside of Albany County have discussed introducing legislation to limit the books available in school or public libraries, including changes to obscenity laws. So how would you respond to that type of legislation?
Well, I think we all know that that this is referring to a lot of press recently about a couple of particular books that are in public libraries. Not all books are educational. And I believe that pornography doesn't belong in the library. Our children are exposed to sexualization in all kinds of ways in our culture these days. We hardly have a culture that's friendly to childhood. And parents have freedom to know that's not a banned book. It means that taxpayers don't pay for pornography.
Thank you, Diana. Marav, go ahead.
To those of you who don't know, I'm Jewish. Part of my family was destroyed in the Holocaust. It started by banning books, then moved on to burning books, and it ended up burning people. Now, I believe that people know, parents know what their child can assimilate, what their child can understand. They know their children best. Just like Carly's mom knew she could handle what she had to read that book. So I say, we as a government should not legislate. We should not ban books. We should not decide what kids can or cannot handle. Let the parents make the decisions. Yes, we should have different sections in the library. Yes, parents should keep an eye on what their kids see online. In fact, a lot more pornography can be found online than in any library I've ever been to. So I say, parental control of what your kid is exposed to is your responsibility, not mine.
Thank you, Marav. All right, starting with Wayne for the next one. This, I hope, is not too Frankenstein question. We have some questions about changes to laws governing state elections. So there was some reference to how all of you are Republicans and Democrats, and maybe our state is not as open to third parties. Questions around making primary elections open, thinking about alternative voting methods. So just thinking broadly about our election system, are there any is there any legislation, if any, that you would support to change the current election laws?
When I first got into this campaign, I attended some Albany County Republican things, and there was a lot of concern about crossover voting. That is the one thing that I have heard the most disturbances about. I guess it goes along with the free speech as well. But also there's something fundamentally wrong with changing coats in August to manipulate somebody else's ability to field good candidates. So I think I would be a proponent of just eliminating crossover voting.
Thank you. Carly, go ahead.
The people of Wyoming should be able to vote in the elections that impact them. That means they should be able to vote in every election. Ideally, I think we should have open primaries where we get to vote in either party's primary. I mean, I guess ideally we wouldn't have parties and we would all run on ideas and we would all vote on the people that have shared ideas. So, and I know this has come a lot in front of corporations, and there's a lot of ideas about ranked choice voting or different methods of how we're going to look at maybe a more democratic vote. And I know that those votes tend to have more diverse outcomes. But I don't know exactly how that plays out in Wyoming. But what I do know is that the people of Wyoming should get to vote in the elections that impact them. And that means open primaries.
Thank you, Carly. Chris.
Yeah, I've sponsored legislation for quite a number of years to try to open up opportunities for elections to ensure that all Wyomingites do get to vote in all of the elections that matter to them, that it's open to all, that it's free and fair, that you have that type of access. And the best approach for that really is an open primary where, regardless of your political party, you end up on the same primary ballot. At that point, you don't have to worry about crossover voting. That's not an issue. You don't have to worry about third-party concepts or independence again. Those aren't issues because you put everybody on the same ballot and you give them all an equal chance. Everybody has access to that same ballot. And then you have a general election where if you do a top two from that open primary, then you have a head-to-head. It doesn't matter what party they are. That's a system that's used in a couple of states in the country right now, but they have some problems where they're not using ranked choice or approval for the selection criteria. So you can put together a couple of different systems. If you put an approval primary along with an open primary top two, then you end up with the two most favored candidates moving from the primary election to the general election. Parties can do whatever they want. They can endorse whomever they want. Parties stop being a part of the government because they're not supposed to be part of the government. They're clubs. Clubs should stay clubs. Elections should be about the public and about the people, and we can create that system if we choose to.
Thank you. Go ahead, Diana.
Well, during the forum that we had for the primary, I said I was opposed to an open primary. However, researching the matter, I've come to a different conclusion. I'm persuaded that an open primary with all candidates running under an umbrella of party affiliation, club affiliation, gives voters a notion of the kind of philosophy that a candidate is coming from, what they believe, what their philosophy of government is. So I think that's important. And then the top two people advance to the general. I think that would be, and no rank choice.
Thank you, Diana. Marav, go ahead.
Sounds like we are all in agreement on this one.
I hate that.
So two thoughts. Many people in Wyoming are registered as unaffiliated. So they don't have any choice in the primary. And that's not fair. So if we have open primary, everybody can vote. And I think that is our civic duty. And I think that is the beauty of democracy, that every vote counts, everybody has a vote. So to account and accommodate those Wyomingites who don't want to be affiliated with a specific party, we should have open primaries. And the other thing is, in 2020, we in the Democratic Party, we had ranked choice voting. And I thought that was the best approach, because that way you can rank the candidates, and in any case, your voice is counted. Whether it's a full vote or a half vote, you still make a difference. And I think that is important.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ken.
So actually, I think you finally did ask a question where we had some disagreement. Wayne said a moment ago that he would ban crossover voting, and I would not. I would absolutely allow that, but I think that's the least we can do. We need to do a lot more than just allow crossover voting. I do like the idea of the open primary. I think that's going farther than allowing crossover voting, but it goes farther because it's better. It does a better job. One of the things that I'm running on is I really despise the partisanship that's grown up, and the division and the toxicity of our political discourse, and that I think is exacerbated by the fact that there are really only two parties that ever have a chance of winning anything. The two-party system divides people. You have to pick a team, pick a tribe, and you have to beat the other side, and it turns into a battle of power. And it's not a battle of ideas. I want to talk about ideas. My campaign slogan is policies, not politics. I want to talk about policies, and I want to talk about it with people who are smart and who have different ideas. I like having a debate. I like having a conversation with people who disagree with me. But you can't do that in a toxic, strict two-party system when one side thinks it owns the state and just ignore the other side, and it gets toxic. So I want to do anything I can to encourage people to talk to each other, and having open primaries and ranked choice voting, I think, are two ways that we can reduce the level of toxicity in our public debate.
Thank you, Ken. Carly, you're going to start us off for this one, and then I'm going to mix things up, and I'm going to switch. Oh, yes. Perfect. While you two are switching, after this round, I'm going to switch the order, and I'm going to have Carly answer first and move that way. Okay, just in case somebody's always stealing your thunder because you speak after them or whatever. So I'm just going to switch and go the opposite direction. So Carly, you'll answer this question first, but then you'll also answer the next question first. Sorry, double whammy. I believe in you. Also, you don't have an opponent, so you can do it. Thank you. All right, so in that last question, people focused more broadly on open primaries or ranked choice and kind of that flavor of focus on election laws. I want you to think about voter access and things that make voting more accessible, more secure, all the things that we want for our elections that sometimes are in tension with one another. So I want you to think about access and security. Is there anything else specifically in that more narrowly focused way that you would advocate for any changes on? And I think I'm going to make this just like a 60-second question, if that's okay. Any other things in terms of voter access, making it easier to vote or more difficult to vote, but obviously the more difficult, I think the aim is election security. I think that's the motivation there. So anything you would change on that side of it for access to ballots and voting? Go ahead, Carly.
Thank you. We live in a digital world now, and our voter registration requires a notary if you want to register to vote, and you're not in the county clerk's office. That's a barrier for a lot of people living in rural areas. They have to drive quite a distance. In some instances, it's 3 hours to go register to vote. I think that's problematic. I think we should have online voter registration where we can register to vote online. I think that we should be able to have a more open voting possibilities for folks that have criminal records. If you have been prosecuted as a felon, I still think that you have the right to vote because those laws still impact you. And so we should be making less barriers for people to vote and making it easier. And that might also include making sure that people automatically maybe get their ballots and that they can vote.
Thank you, Carly. We're still going in the normal order. This is where I'm going to mess myself up with changes. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, and there are a lot of ideas really that would help expand access. We talk a lot about the security side of it, but realistically we saw no data about election fraud, although we were focused on reducing access to the polls. If we have automated registration when you're signing up for your driver's license, for example, as part of the driver's license sign up, so you're 16, other states do that where you pre-register, and then when you're 18 years old, you're already ready to vote. That's a good policy that we could adopt. We could auto mail out ballots, so instead of having to re-register every year, if you're on the registration rolls, you get your ballots. Instead of having to re-up each time as an absentee, just receive that through the mail. And another possible opportunity that we see in other states and other countries is really having election day off, because we know that even though you're supposed to have that hour off, there's an awful lot of folks that just can't make it to the polls that want to make it to the polls. We can enable that by trying to celebrate it a little bit more and give that opportunity.
Thank you, Chris. Go ahead, Diana.
Yeah, I'm all for election day off, and let's have a party and encourage people to vote. I don't know about, I'd have to think about the way that people register. I think that each person, each adult person should have the right to vote, but that vote should be assigned to them. So whatever way that is secure, that each person has a vote, that would fly in the face of just mailing out ballots. I don't believe that that's safe or secure, and it just it encourages, well, it's just not, it's not right to pass out ballots and not tie them to a particular voter.
Thank you, Diana. Marav?
So anybody who has been an election judge and has gone through the training knows how careful we are in securing our elections. Every ballot has to be initialized by 2 judges. Every precinct has an election observer. We have the most secure voting system in the world, I believe. And before I moved to the United States, I lived in Israel, and I can tell you, you have automatic voter registration. You have, you get reminders, multiple reminders. Here's your ballot, don't forget to vote. And then the polls are accessible. They make sure that whether you're disabled or whatever issue you might have in accessing the poll, that these issues are addressed. Here, we make it very difficult to vote, and it's really, really, really difficult to cheat in our elections. So I think our elections are super secure.
Thank you, Marav. Ken, go ahead.
I agree with everything that's been said. I just want to focus on one aspect. The latest boogeyman, according to the current Secretary of State and the incoming likely Secretary of State, is drop boxes, ballot drop boxes. They say this is an opportunity for fraud. We're going to have the ballots stuffed because of that. Anybody who believes that does not understand how elections work and what the security measures are. You can't if I tried to drop 10 ballots in the box signed with my name, I'd be prosecuted for that. I'm going to be checked at the time when the first time I vote, I'm going to be checked off as having voted. The second time, I'm going to get caught. You can't. There's no way to cheat. The ballot drop box does not provide any opportunity for cheating. The election judges are very good at what they do. Every time you say that there's a fraud going to be committed because of the drop box, you're basically saying that the workers are going to cheat. The people who run our elections are cheaters. I do not believe that for 1 second.
Thank you, Ken. And Wayne, to you.
I gave Jeff Bezos my security code off the back of my credit card, and he's never taken a penny from me. This is the 21st century. We can figure this out. There's a lot of great ideas up here. Election day off, yes. Go along with your driver's license. If we can't figure out how to do it separately and electronically, cool. The notary thing out of town is ridiculous. The words voting and restriction should never be said in the same sentence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, now we'll see how smart I am if I can keep track of my new system. Carly, starting with you and moving the opposite way. Are we ready? With due respect to those of you currently serving in the legislature, what's the biggest mistake made by the state legislature in the last 5 years? Oh, sorry, back to 90 seconds. Thank you.
That's one of the biggest mistakes, actually, is the amount of time that we actually spend on bills and the amount of problems that we pretend exist. The biggest mistake of the legislature, I think, overall, is that we, as a body, the legislature, assumes that what they think and believe is what the people of Wyoming believe. I think that's why we passed a trigger ban even though I believe that many of the people in this state, across parties, support women's access to safe and legal abortions. We pass legislation that comes from somewhere else in the country that isn't an issue here in Wyoming, but we're so focused on it because it's at the top of a newspaper headline. We waste a lot of time on those things. And we have real problems to solve. How do we fix our budget? How do we make our budget more transparent? How do we make sure that 26,000 people have more health care tomorrow morning instead of die in the hospital lobby room walking in on the day that their health care first kicks in? And that's a story from a woman that I know. There's a lot of issues that we don't solve, and we waste a lot of time talking about things that aren't real.
Thank you, Carly. Wayne, to you.
Having not been there, it's a very difficult question. The knowledge that I've gained with conversation with people is there's too much infighting in the chamber. Ken alluded to that earlier in another question. You know, we're representatives, we're not leaders. I'm being asked to represent this district. I don't want to be your corporate overlord. It's what you guys want from us. You're the boss. And then the non-transparent budget and 200 buckets of money laying around. It's described as insanity. That's got to go.
Thank you, Wayne. Ken, go ahead.
So I don't know if this is something that has happened in the last 5 years or not, but I think it's been longer than that. But it's getting worse. It has gotten a lot worse in the last 5 years, and that is the biggest mistake is not listening to the constituents, not listening to the voters. There are some good, there's a lot of decent Republicans there who do listen to their voters, and they are fighting constantly with the party leadership who does not listen to their voters and who want to impose their will on the legislators. So far, many legislators have been able to resist those pressures, but they're also getting primaried. If they fight with the Republican Party, they get primaried, and a lot of them lost their seats in this last cycle. In the last primary. And that's a problem. When the party leadership thinks they know best and damn the voters, and that's what the Republican Party leadership does believe, that's the problem. And again, I don't want to cast aspersions to the very good legislators. There are good legislators there who do the right thing and do listen to the voters, and they're the ones that we need to support and not primary and kick out of the party.
Thank you, Ken. Marav, go ahead.
So I'm going to get a little specific on this one. And I think the biggest mistake that the Wyoming legislature has done in the last few years is fail to pass Medicaid expansion. And it relates to the abortion trigger ban that I hope to be able to squeeze into 90 seconds. States that expanded Medicaid have much lower maternal mortality rates. They also have much lower infant mortality rates. Every time the Wyoming legislature votes against Medicaid expansion, they are killing our women. They are killing our babies. Every single time they vote against Medicaid expansion, they are killing our mothers and they are killing our babies. Because we are losing OBG clinic and services all over the state. And they call themselves the pro-life, and they pass an abortion ban at the same time that they are voting against Medicaid expansion. So I think that is the biggest mistake, and if I get elected, I'll do my best to help Chris and Carly and Ken pass that legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Marav. Diana, to you. You can have a new microphone, buddy.
Oh my. Well, speaking with one another with respect, dialogue, more cross-committee conferencing, more open discussion. I think that party leadership holds up bills in committee, not letting them go to the floor for debate and discussion. I think that's all I'll say.
Thank you, Diana. Chris, to you.
I think I generally agree with everything identified as being something to really look back on with some regret. I do think that the single, from a policy standpoint, Medicaid expansion probably is the worst non-decision, the worst non-passage. But when I think back to the last 12 years and then focusing on the mistakes of the past 5 years, it really comes down to a shift in focus. It's a large shift where prior to 5 years ago, the legislature really was about solving problems. It worked pretty hard, worked well together. There was a lot of collegiality, and a focus was on trying to make Wyoming a better place. Solve problems, have a vision, do the right thing for the people of Wyoming. At some point in the last 5 years, that shifted. And it shifted to the point where we're a lot more like national politics now. We're more about rhetoric. We're more about complaining about things and shaking our fists and yelling and arguing. It gets back to what Diana said about playing politics in committees rather than focusing on solutions. And so it's more than just one issue, but it's at the root of a lot of the other problems that we heard expressed here. And I wish we could go back and find a way to restore that quality of engagement, of collegiality, and bring the legislature back to the institution it was 10 years ago.
Thank you, Chris. Wayne, we're going to start with you for the next one. Several of you mentioned the trigger ban in your last answers, and we've had some questions on the topic. I hate to ask these questions because they tend to be so divisive, and people probably already know where you stand on many things. So we'll see if I've phrased this in a way that... I know. Okay, well, get ready. Here we go. Gloves are coming off. So with the reversal of Roe v. Wade and Wyoming's trigger ban, people have called out that pieces of our state's identity feel in conflict. They've named being the equality state and women's rights, feeling threatened by this. Others have called out our libertarian streak and this freedom and small government idea that has a lot of traction in the state. And then there's also the piece of the state that hews to conservative values and protecting life beginning at conception. All of those things are in tension with one another, and we're now in a new state with that. You can highlight, those different values of our state that you hold most dear, but I wonder, as a legislator, how you would strike the balance between them in a way that best serves all of Wyoming.
Well, the reason that we're here tonight is the League of Women Voters, focusing on that singular word, women. The women in this room have daughters, they have sisters, they have friends. We need a voice of reason. What blows my mind is the extreme right holds the sanctity of life in such a way and then completely reverses it on other areas. It was simple. I'm for the right of a woman to choose, at least in the first 15 weeks.
Thank you, Wayne. Ken, to you.
Thank you. And this is, of course, a very hot button issue. How do you how do you propose something that's going to be generally accepted across the state is very difficult to do. There's different ideas about when life begins and when the fetus has rights different from those of the mother. And there's all kinds of different scientific and religious and other kinds of beliefs about that. And it's not the job of the legislature to pick one and say that's the way it's going to be. All I know for sure is that the government has no business making those decisions. Those are individual moral decisions that the individuals have to make. When a mother expecting mother is what these are very private decisions, very private, intense, personal decisions, very emotional. Nobody's going to choose to get an abortion lightly. They're not going to use that. It's not going to be a simple decision for anybody. All I know is that I don't think the government has any business telling a woman what to do with her body, and all those choices about when life begins, whether you view it religiously or scientifically or any other way, it's not the government's business. Stay out of that.
Thank you, Ken. Marav, to you.
Thank you. So I am a fierce pro-choice advocate. But you have to look at things in a different way. We can force people, we can legislate, we can ban things, or we can go look for solutions. And in many cases, we can find solutions such that abortion becomes a non-issue. And so things like sex education, like raising our children to respect each other and respect the rights of each other, reduce the problems associated with rape and incest, offering people advice and teaching them how to use birth control, and also offering solutions for the very first days after whatever event happens. And in my case, and something that I do personally, is trying to find solutions to the major loss of human embryos when we use in vitro fertilization. And if you want to know what I do, actually using spotted skunks to make sure we don't lose human life to in vitro fertilization, talk to me later.
Thank you, Marav. Diana, go ahead.
Abortion will continue to be legal in some states. Our state, I believe that it was a proper thing to put the decision back in the state's hands. I believe that our human life comes from a creator, not from government. I believe that a wanted child is no different than an unwanted child. At cell division, a child becomes its own unique person as it develops. A woman's biological, the fact that she's carrying that child doesn't give her a superseding right over the life of the child. So I believe that women need care, families need care. Maternal health is very, very important. The support that we give women who find themselves in an unwanted pregnancy needs to be far more than it is. But two wrongs don't make a right. Never has, never will.
Thank you, Diana. And Chris, to you.
So I respect all of those beliefs that were just mentioned and want to ensure that we have a system that respects all of those beliefs. The challenge is those are not beliefs and views that are shared by all Wyomingites. Pro-choice and pro-life are not mutually exclusive. They're treated as such, but that's not the case. Pro-choice is simply about who makes the decision, who gets to decide what values are used. Does the state have the authority to decide all of the reproductive views and values of all of the women of the state of Wyoming? That's pretty big government. That's not small government. When you empower your state with the authority over reproductive rights, you've taken a pretty large step away from small government. I support empowering women. Empower women to make the choice, however they choose. It's not up to the government. It's not about the government. It shouldn't be the government's choice. In fact, most of the time, I'm very much pro-life. I oppose death penalty. I support Medicaid expansion to try and ensure everybody has access to affordable health care, support policies for suicide prevention. And in fact, I don't know that I would counsel anyone to have an abortion because honestly, it's none of my business. It just isn't. Nor is it the government's business. Pro-choice.
Thank you, Chris. Carly, I think you're the last on this one.
So I think to go back to the question of, all people have all these different views about what you should be able to do or choose to do with your body. And I think that Chris kind of stated it best. We can have all those views together, and I can respect all those views by not sticking my nose in it and not writing legislation that is going to make a decision for you. You get to go make that choice. You and the people that you are closest to that love you, who are in a difficult situation with you, make that decision in a room with yourselves, and there's no room in that room for the government. I don't want the government in my doctor's office, and I think that most people in the state of Wyoming don't want the government in their doctor's office. And we also know that doctors don't want the government in their doctor's office either, because that is when the government gets to help make decisions about whether they can save someone or not. And we don't want to be in that position. I am staunchly pro-choice, and I strongly believe, and we might find out through constitutional amendment, that the state of Wyoming, for the most part, is as well.
Thank you, Carly. I appreciate your thoughtfulness on that response. It can be very fireball-y, and I appreciate just the thoughtfulness that y'all used with that. So, Ken, we are changing topics entirely. Are you ready? Wyoming has passed several laws that have laid the foundation for cryptocurrency and that industry flourishing here. The question is, how would you get up to speed in time for the 2023 session on this topic? I think it's assuming that you're not already up to speed, and I have no idea. But could you speak to your familiarity with cryptocurrency and ideas that you have surrounding that as a newer industry in Wyoming? Go ahead.
The way I would probably first try to get to speed is I'd ask Chris, because Chris is on the committee that's doing all that work. It's an interesting concept, but I have questions, Chris. I really do have questions. I do not completely understand how cryptocurrency works and how how anybody makes money at it and how it could benefit the state. I thought, in my limited understanding of cryptocurrency, is that it's an attempt to get away from government control. We don't like fiat currency that the government controls, so we're going to come up with our own system of currency that we control without the government overseeing us. So how does the government have anything to say about it? I don't understand that. That's my first question for Chris, and maybe you'll be able to answer those questions. Also, the other thing that I am concerned about with cryptocurrency is the green overload. The amount of electricity that is required to maintain these gigantic ledgers that can only get bigger. They never get smaller, they get bigger, and the demand on energy resources grows every day with cryptocurrency, and that can, and because of the way we generate electricity these days, that creates carbon pollution, carbon dioxide. So I have concerns about cryptocurrency, and I know that Chris is a big advocate for it, and I want to know more about it.
Thank you. Go ahead, Marav.
So Ken just brought up my main opposition to cryptocurrency, and that is that we are using electricity to run a scheme that is even worse than gambling. I don't mind if people gamble, but we can't afford to add to carbon pollution in the atmosphere. Now, if cryptocurrency was all fueled up by green energy, maybe, but given how difficult it is for us to transition to green energy, now is not the time to invest and develop cryptocurrency. I'll give you an example. When the Texas grid failed in spring of 2020, people died. People died because they froze to death. They died because they died of toxicity of carbon monoxide because they tried to warm their houses with gas stoves. And also, a lot of human embryos died when freezers in clinics failed. So here we are, taking energy to create something that is vague and doesn't really exist on the backs of our planet and human life.
Thank you, Marav. Diana, to you.
I'm being nice.
No, yes. Well, actually, when I started this campaign, I have been researching everything like crazy. I've talked to legislators, I dig in the internet, I do all kinds of things to try to inform myself about so many topics about which I, don't know a lot. So cryptocurrency was one of them, and I actually this week spent a couple of hours on the backs of other hours trying to understand. And I had some of the same questions for my experts that Ken did. What I gathered from it all is that I think virtual currency is not going to go away at all, and it's going to, what we need to do is make sure that our government, our state government, is not loaning or giving money to companies to develop this technology. That ought to be on the back of private enterprise. I believe that, and it should not be centralized. The key thing about crypto is that it's not centralized. That's its main virtue, and it can't be controlled by any one sector. So that's good. So the state government needs to, I don't know exactly the reasons that Governor Gordon vetoed this last bill, but I think caution, it's not going to go away. We need to figure out how to participate safely.
Thank you, Diana. Chris, to you.
So I'll try and address some of the concerns. I'm the co-chairman of the Blockchain Select Committee and have been for the past 5 years, and we've passed about 30 pieces of digital asset, cryptocurrency, and blockchain legislation. Wyoming is currently the national and in some ways the global leader in blockchain and digital asset regulation, legal framework, and is a destination for those that want to innovate in this space. The motivation for that was what we talked about earlier. How do we diversify the economy in Wyoming in a way that uses what we have and what we do well? But getting back to some of the concerns, and the concerns are all valid concerns, and they're all things that we take into consideration and have taken into consideration. With regard to the power consumption, the reality is that as blockchains have evolved, they've moved away from what's called proof of work, which is what's using the incredible amount of energy. Ethereum, which is the second largest cryptocurrency and blockchain in the world, just a couple of weeks ago, in fact, switched to what's called proof of stake, which doesn't really use any power consumption of note. So that original form, Bitcoin still uses a tremendous amount of energy. That's not the future of it, and that's not what we're looking to. As Diana said, it's going to stick around. Virtual currencies, cryptocurrencies, and blockchain are here to stay. So Wyoming should be a leader both from the standpoint of protecting the climate, protecting the people, but also from this economic development. I typically go a lot longer than 90 seconds when I talk about blockchain.
Thank you, Chris. Carly, to you.
Going back to the question of how would you get up to speed, how would you understand cryptocurrency? And I'll tell you what I did do. I did ask my friend Chris down here, and I did talk to many members of the blockchain committee, and I asked them a lot of questions because we have names like decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, but then they talked to me about sandboxes and all sorts of other things. And I feel like I got a grasp, and then I'd go and I'd say, okay, well, I've got one side of it. I'm going to go ask some cynics. I'm going to ask some people that think that blockchain is a bad idea. And I learned a lot about why people think that blockchain is a scam, or that cryptocurrencies are scams, or ways to make money for a few people and not many people, much like our regular dollar. I still can't really tell you what a blockchain is, but I know that I feel uneasy enough about it that I question it, and I know that the people who have explained a lot of the downfalls, some of which I think have been brought up here tonight, have kind of made a little bit more sense to me. And I know if a bill comes before me and I don't know what it's saying, I'm pretty sure that the people of Wyoming don't get it either. And so if we can't figure out how to make it so that the people of Wyoming can say, I know what this is and I support it, knowing exactly what it is, great. But until then, I'm not supportive of a lot of these bills.
Thank you, Carly. And Wayne, last thought on this question.
Well, I'm glad you saved me for last. I had a lot of time to listen to other people who knew what they were talking about.
Lucky you.
You know, I know Elon Musk bought $5 billion worth of it. He's not stupid. I know that the technology involved in these blockchains is so far ahead of the curve of what the Fed has or what the standard economic forces have. It's fascinating to watch. Don't have a clue how to go about it, but it's pretty interesting. I wouldn't throw it out with the bathwater, though.
Thank you, Wayne. I had hoped to get to more questions, rapid fire questions, other Frankenstein questions, and it appears that we're running out of time. So we're going to have to leave it at that. Audience, would you join me in thanking our candidates for their thoughtful contributions tonight? Candidates, would you join me in thanking the audience for their tricky questions? Lynn's going to come up with a few closing remarks and reminders about voting, election information, etc. So hang tight for those, and then we'll have some mingling time with the candidates. So hang tight. Lynn, don't walk away. It's your turn.
All right, well, let's all thank Carrie for her wonderful moderating. She'll be back next Wednesday for our last forum. You know, people have been calling and emailing me about how do I get a hold of a voter guide. I've heard very compelling and sobering stories about how this has just meant so much to people who are new to town or have been in town for 50 years. In any case, due to the generosity of the boomerang, you know, during the primary, we had to pay for these copies. Now they're free. So we picked up about 60 of them the other day, and some of them were taken last night. I think the boomerang still has a few copies that you can go and get and express your gratitude. You know, the league doesn't pay for this printing. And that would be a terribly expensive. Judy, do you have any idea how expensive? I would guess tens of thousands, wouldn't you? Yeah, prohibitively expensive. And lots of leagues don't have this opportunity. So express your gratitude to them as well. I don't think any elected officials. Oh, we have a candidate who came in. Do you want to introduce yourself? Okay, so we have one candidate in the back who doesn't want to be up here. Nate Martin came to watch our forum tonight. Where else can you get information? You know, it's almost too late to mail in your ballots. I think maybe it's next Monday. But after that, if you already have a ballot, you can either take it to the courthouse and sit down at one of those fancy new machines that my partner just loves. He tells everybody, oh, you should try these new machines. Express voting, yes. They'll even give you earphones. In any case, however you want, you can take your ballot to the poll on November 8th. But before that, learn about the candidates. So one way to avoid reading the whole thing, you're not going to vote for all these candidates. You're going to vote for the people who are on your ballot. If you go to vote411, so that's the address, vote411.org. And if you use these little QR codes that are all around us, that'll take you to the site. You can punch or you can type in your address, and it will give you your ballot. your candidates and your ballot, and from there you can go and read about your candidates. All right, well, I think that's all I can say about this, except once again, I learned so much from the candidates we have. It's a shame you all can't go to the legislature. I'm sure you'd be better than a lot of the ones who are there now. Anyway, so thank you, thank you, thank you. The league thanks you, we all thank you. And, you know, tell people who weren't here tonight that they should watch this on video. And where is it posted? It's posted on the library website. It's posted on the league's Facebook. It's posted on the league's website. It's posted on Vote 411. And a lot of candidates are posting our videos on their Facebook pages. So just, you know, search for them. You'll find them in many, many places. All right, well, so until next Wednesday, bye-bye. Thank you all for being here. Chat. The place is ours until 9 o'clock.